Hi, I'm that Slavic writer guy, and today we're going to be talking about what is quite possibly the most seminal contribution to American grand opera in the past 50 years at least. And that would be John Adams' masterpiece, Nixon in China. I have got to level with you. This is one of my favorite operas that I have ever seen, probably third only to Turandot and Aida. And really, it's not just because of the music, but it's about something that, as native English speakers, we really don't get to see a lot of, which is not only how a composer can move you and inspire you with the melodies he's created, but also with how the lyrics that the singers are singing mesh with that music in order to create a very immersive ambiance where you really start to feel the pain of the characters um, by understanding what they're talking about in your own native language, which for me and probably a lot of you is modern American English. Um, so this one is really an interesting think piece that brings up a lot of questions in the viewer's mind as it exposes you to the inner psychology of what's going on in the heads of these larger and life world leaders as they are going through these history changing events of Nixon's visit to China in 1972. Um, so without further ado, let's get into their heads, and as we'd say in America, let's go to the opera. Nixon in China premiered at the Houston Grand Opera in 1987 to mostly mixed reviews, which would continue over the next 10, 20 years up until the early 2000s and 2010s. And again, the style of John Adams, the composer, which is minimalism, is not like what arguably could be called the show tunes that we've come to expect from composers like Puccini or Verdi. But what really makes this opera shine is the marriage of John Adams' music with the libretto and the poetry provided by Alex Goodman's libretto, which really is free verse poetry in the modern American sense. So basically, as I've talked about, it really is not so much about just the events themselves, although we see many of them portrayed in the opera, such as Nixon's meeting with Mao, Nixon meeting Zhou Enlai at the airfield outside of Beijing, or even a bit of an interpretation of when, along with Madame Mao, the Nixons saw a performance of her ballet, The Detachment of Red Women. But it really makes the characters step out of their skins and talk to you as people who are taking these larger than life steps, but at the same time are just people who really have their own foibles and are really, in many cases, just sort of scared or even broken on the inside, especially as you see with the character of Pat Nixon. Um, so I could gush about this on and on and on, and excuse me, I probably will continue about through the rest of this opera talk. Um, but really, when Alex Goodman and John Adams and the director Peter Sellers set out to write this, they were determined that it not be a farce or a satire of these larger than life events, but really a cerebral drama where characters like Nixon and Mao, and even people like Madame Mao and Pat Nixon were portrayed like these larger than life but tragic on the inside operatic figures in a way that is sympathetic. So without further ado, let's get to it with our cast of characters. Okay, now this is almost a bit surreal trying to do this cast of characters where normally I'm talking about counts and dukes and peasants and mysterious doctors and all of those characters of 19th century opera stock. But here, starting out, we've got President Richard Milhouse Nixon, a baritone who is really concerned with portraying himself and his assuredness to the world stage, but in a precursor to what we've seen, where how the news makes these larger in life political events, especially going forward into our era in the 21st century. He's also very concerned and afraid with how the modern media and satellite live television is going to portray him in doing this. Then we have his wife, a soprano, Pat Nixon, who is the dutiful wife that follows Nixon around in the entire first act, but in the second one, really shows herself to be just a kind hearted person who is being crushed under all the pressure of not only her notoriety in this role as the First Lady going to China, but also just as the First Lady in general, when she really only was in real life putting up with all of the limelight for her husband and really just wanted to be a good housewife. Following that, we have Zhou Enlai, the party chairman, who's played by a tenor, and he is the most circumspect of the characters in all of the opera, who, as things are going on, is not so much caught up in what will people think, or as we're going to get to Mao in a bit, what people will think of his legacy, as both Nixon and Mao are, but very circumspect Zhou Enlai is about the legacy that this is going to leave to the world, and that they're at this very one pivotal point in history that connects both everything that's gone on before from his perspective in the long war of the Chinese Communist Party and the Red Army to get to the point where they are now, and now where they're taking a departure to that, to where things are going in the future. So he really is kind of the philosopher and thinker of this, almost a master of ceremonies, if you will, throughout this opera. Then we've got Henry Kissinger. He's played by a bass, and unsurprisingly, he is a bit of the political opportunist and realist, if you might say, and is openly, nakedly concerned with how are things going to politically play for his close ally, Richard Nixon. Um, and finally, we have Madame Mao. She's played by a mezzo soprano, really a coloratura soprano, in my opinion. If you which you all see, you'll see some clips of it. Her aria in Act Two. Um, but she is really the stick to the carrot of Mao Zedong's philosophy and legacy in this opera to go along with it or I'll kill you, and I'm proud of it, as we see her come out to be. So she's kind of portrayed as an opposite side of the coin to Mao in that respect. Um, and really in the same way as Pat Nixon is to Richard, where he's concerned with the limelight and she's just concerned with surviving it. And they all come to terms with this in the final act of the opera, where they really have to reflect on all that's gone on and what their role in it and larger world history has been up till the point that the opera was premiered in 1987, but I really think has a shit ton of resonance that the composers and the librettists could not have known going now forth into the present day as we look at present world affairs, how political alliances are changing right now in 2023, and even the West's relations with China. So really, it gives you a lot to think about and an insight into these characters that become so sympathetic, even though they're larger in life. Still, look at me gush. Can you tell I love this thing already? So let's get on to that historic moment when the Spirit of 76, Richard Nixon's airplane, lands at a military air base outside of Beijing, China, ending 25 years of China's isolation from the West with one handshake between Richard Nixon and Zhou Enlai. As the opera opens, we are faced with a chorus of Chinese military men and a broader section of the Chinese public as a whole singing something called the Three Rules of Discipline and the 8 Points for Attention, which were something given by Mao to the Red Army starting way back in 1928, that were basically uh, watchwords for respecting civilians and women during wartime that the adherence to which allowed the Red Army, when they were fighting the Kuomintang, to actually gain the favor of the people and helped in kicking the Kuomintang out. And so these were codified after Mao took power, and then they were added onto with some more points of order for the army um, later on, which is what you hear this chorus singing. And really, it gives you almost this hypnotic effect of the people singing, reciting the dogma of the time, and waiting for change to come in the embodiment of whoops, this plane that drops out of the sky on an operatic stage according to instrumentation of a plane landing. I know of no other opera that can boast of this. And so the plane lands, and at least according to the Peter Sellers staging, the original staging, the hatch opens, and Richard Nixon walks right out and gives a wave to the assembled dignitaries, followed by his dutiful wife, Pat. And they come down the stairs to the tarmac, and the very quiet but hushed handshake between Premier Zhou Enlai and Nixon takes place. And then right on after that, what we see is the action stops, or as it goes on, we're seeing what's going through Nixon's head as he goes down the line of other dignitaries at first, and then it takes place in his hotel room. And it's a frenzied aria about news and the importance of news in our society and the immediacy of news, which for his generation and for his term as president with live television and something was something newfangled and powerful, but Nixon realizes, and it scares him, also a weapon that could be used to bring him down, that could crucify a world leader as fast as it could be used to build him up. And so we see him with his chest puff out in front of the dignitaries, and then when he goes behind the curtain in his hotel room, he's even neurotic about it. What is my image going to be? How will it portray me? At the same time, bragging about how he is like all of his other victories that he'd achieved, like one of the moon landings, couching it in terms of the American big band and swing music that he loved so well. We have flown east of the sun, west from the moon. The melody even comes in. That he's portraying to the media as he's out in front of everyone. And then as you go behind the curtain of his hotel room, he's scared. His hands are shaking. And he's still trying to keep up that persona. My hand is steady as a rock, he even does, and it's shaking. So you really kind of see the man behind the myth that has landed on the tarmac right in front of you. And his aides come and kind of get him to plaster himself back up. And we go directly into the very quick meeting that happened in real life with Chairman Mao and Richard Milhous Nixon. And what's really important to see here is really how Mao is portrayed. He was a very old man at that time, and frail, and he's being portrayed as having to be held up by his aides, which were always around him at all times. And when he sings, he largely sings things about philosophy and that which concerned him for his entire time once he became chairman. But if you listen to how the aides take up whatever he says and amplify it and even distort it or take selective passages from it, they're distorting it almost like they're the mouthpiece of what he says, distorting it to the people for their own ends and for the ends of other factions within the Communist Party, using him as a mouthpiece, especially as he was about to die, for whatever they wanted going forward. And he even sings, at once, first during their meeting, pioneers first, then profiteers. And then he sings it again right as he's going out, kind of vehemently shrugging off the aides, going pioneers first, then profiteers. Like, it's a man who knows his legacy is being twisted, and he can't do anything about it. So you get that scene right in with Nixon very nakedly trying to use this meeting for a political gain and reciting what little he knows or is briefly studied up about on Chinese history, to turn it to geopolitical talking points to his advantage, and trying to match Mao Zedong on the level of his philosophy. And they both talk about fathers and sons, and again, the importance of intergenerations. What are we leaving to the new generation? How will people see us in the past? Will our sons look back on us and see that we have done as good? As Nixon sings, fathers and sons, let us join hands. Let us join hands, make peace for once. So you come in with that. Kissinger, again, just very blinders on, real politic. And again, Zhou Enlai stepping in at many times, sometimes agreeing with Mao, but him even saying, forgive me, I must be blunt. This is reality. So again, kind of the masters, playing the masters of ceremonies there. And really, I could, talk about fireworks that usually end the acts like I usually do. But really, we're about to go into, I think of it as Act One, Scene 2, and here, this scene really goes out kind of with a whisper, and indeed, it's kind of Mao who gives his last gasp, being let out of the room. So again, what are our legacies? How that concerns us? How we're trying to use current events to shape our legacies still. In the terms of Nixon, while in Mao, he's seen it already shaped, already being stolen and taken by others. And again, you take these larger than life figures that lived and did these things, especially in my parents' lifetime. And they're already wondering what's going to become of them, and trying to do the best they can among very changing, high stakes circumstances. The scene then moves to the banquet that was held in the Nixon's honor that night in the Hall of the Peoples, which was attended by Zhou Enlai and also many of the other Chinese dignitaries. And it first of all starts off with the two main toasts given by Premier Zhou and Nixon. And again, Zhou is very cerebral, talking about where they are seated on the fulcrum of what's in the past and what is in the future, and how far we have fought, and in his case, the Red Army has fought to get this far, and what they've sacrificed for that, and then what is to become of that legacy, and what we leave to our children. Whereas Nixon gives a very much more carpe diem post. Here we are. How much he enjoyed the banquet. How he has heard his favorite songs of big band. Never has heard as good played outside of the United States. And again, he falls back into this rhetoric about mass-scale telecommunications, and how arguably how we are perceived in the media and not what we are doing here today is going to determine events going forward, which I think is really prophetic, considering how media culture in the day is exactly about that. It's about how it's spun. It's about how everyone is looking at their little screen, making determinations at it, and increasingly just getting whatever they think from whatever little feed that they, in their own balkanized little political sphere, is choosing to get it. So again, this opera has such relevance to the present day in Nixon's toast, talking again about the pros and cons of this new era, this newfangled era of mass communications, telecommunications, and he couldn't have seen the rise of the internet, but it still rings true. So everything gets a lot more loquacious as the evening goes on, and the atmosphere becomes a lot more fraternal. Of course, with Mao's ubiquitous aides presiding over the whole thing, and Nixon even saying, and I love the staging when they do this, he sings out finally, "I opposed China. I opposed China. I was wrong." And what the aides do is they're not even speaking, but they mouth the words. Almost all. They were translating for him, right? And so they were translating. And when he says that, they look at each other confused and go like this. And then he sings, "I was wrong." And they just go like this. And that's all they translate. So you're really already trying to see how the party, after Mao's death, was trying to already distort Mao's words for what their own ends were, which after Mao's death, indeed, you saw a great break with the Maoist tradition while still using his cult of personality to justify it going forward. So, really, just even though it's said that Alice Goodman did the whole libretto, researching it just from 1972 sources and before that, how really this opera became prophetic with what we're seeing today and with the fallout of it and the current situation that we're now seeing between China and the West in light of the war with Ukraine, but also in light of China's domination of trade and the balance of trade between, let's say, Europe and the United States, that all came about as a result of these events. So really they're optimistic, but that optimism is tempered when you see Zhou and Lai, but much more about how their egos are going to be perceived going forward, just in two different sides of the same coin with Premier Zhou and Nixon there. And with that, I bring you on to Act 2, which has, out of the three favorite arias I have for the female voice, solos of the women rather, that I have, number 1 would be Caro Nome from Rigoletto, but numbers 2 and 3 would be Pat Nixon's aria, This Is Prophetic, coming from Act 2 of Nixon in China, and Madame Mao's I Am the Wife of Mao Zedong. So those would be numbers 2 and 3. That's how much I love them and how much of a total mindfuck they are, not just because of the music, but even more because of how the lyric mixes with that music to create deeper meaning. Act 2 opens on the following morning, and we see Pat Nixon getting ready for the day. And while she's doing so, repeating these things to herself almost like a mantra. I treat each day like Christmas. I treat each day like Christmas. I come from a poor family. I come from a poor family. Trivial things are not for me. And then the curtain goes up, and Mao's aides are there to escort her on her tour of Beijing. And they start out by warning her in the chorus, look down, look down. The farmer cannot see the land of scars. And, she listens to this, trying not to misstep, while all of the time keeping her chin up and a smile on like this. And she goes through the entire first half of her scene, going through all of these propaganda visits that real life Pat Nixon went through. And the first thing, which it foreshadows the end of this scene in her aria, is she goes to a factory, and she sees they are crafting a porcelain elephant. And she latches onto the elephant, which is the symbol of the Republican Party. And she goes to Mao's aides. Tell me, is it one of a kind? And then she almost begs them, is it one of a kind? And Mao's aides slap her down. They say, no, it has been carefully crafted by the workers in our factory. They can make hundreds every day. And she goes, oh, that's nice. And she keeps her smile on, and she goes to the clinic, and goes to a school. She was a former school teacher, so she brings that up as something to talk about. She gets through an encounter with a real-life pig at a commune, and recalls back to her days as a farm girl, which, as we're about to see, she always was very somewhat nostalgic for. And then they go on to the Summer Palace, and again, they keep warning Pat Nixon, look down, watch your step, Mrs. Nixon. And finally, she falters, not in her step, but in this, guys. And everything stops, and she starts to sing one of the most tragic arias in all of opera. And why is it tragic? It's all about how what she says intermixes with the music, which is very minimalist, but how it mixtures with the words she is singing, all of which is very taking how a first lady would talk on the campaign trail, or how you would at a political speech, giving all of these kind of wooden words words, Americana quotes out, but twisting them the way she's singing, almost like she's come to hate them, and how it's that life in the limelight and having to keep up this facade is never something she asked for and never something she wanted, and how she all did it for her husband, who she's concerned will not get the recognition for doing all of the great things he did later on in history. So some of the things she just starts to sing, let 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 interesting businessmen speculate further. In our bedroom communities, let us be taken by surprise. Um, uh, in another example, she sings about the Statue of Liberty, almost giving herself in the likeness of it, finally saying, with how her facade has faltered, let the expression on the Statue of Liberty's face change just a little. Let her turn and see what lies inland. The unknown soldier risen from his tomb, a clear reference to Nixon. Let him be recognized at home. Let him be recognized at home. An eagle nailed to the barroom wall. It's just really this almost despairing aria about how she fears for her husband's future, and how this whole life being the first lady and having that facade has just come close to breaking her, because in real life, Pat Nixon was famous for never wanting to take on the role of First Lady. She hated the limelight, which I largely know through discovering it through Nixon in China, kind of like how people say, they discovered real American history through watching Hamilton, which I don't know how anyone can call a rap, a piece of opera or musical theater. But with me, Nixon in China was very much this. It's how I got interested in the real world events. Which is, again, why I'm such a fanboy. But so finally, in the end, they're at the Summer Palace Gardens, and just seeing, we see her totally falter from the inside singing this aria. But the aides go, watch your step, Mrs. Nixon. They're almost concerned as to whether she's all right. And she then sees a real-life elephant strapped down in ropes, in chains. And she tries to make light of it, saying she's okay. Why, hello there, Jumbo. But she really feels, in the end, like that chained-up elephant who isn't even one of a kind, and has to bear up under all of it. And you've just seen how it is breaking this woman on the inside. I almost get teary-eyed talking about it. It's that tragic, and it's that beautiful. And so finally, they talk about the struggle that the Chinese people had, her aides, Mao's aides do, digging their own graves. They got 2 bowls of rice a day. They drank white tea. She tries to make light of it. It sounds like you remember them. And then the aides are just by that point walking on eggshells around her. And they go, we should go back now. Almost like they're concerned she's going to break totally. Curtain falls. Act 2, Scene 2 opens with the Nixons watching a performance of Madame Mao's ballet, The Detachment of Red Women, which again did really occur during the Nixons' visit to China. And it starts out as just that. They basically used part of the music when composing this opera, and part of the choreography of the ballet from The Detachment of Red Women, and writing this. And it starts out with something that's is really true and faithful to the actual ballet, how it opens, just very abridged. And but the Nixons start to really get into it, identifying against the role of the cruel landlord in the ballet as just a bad man, like you might see in some westerns, though it's actually they're shocked by his resemblance to Henry Kissinger, but the singer that plays Kissinger is actually in the role in the opera. And so they're really seeing, I think, a bit part of themselves in this. But then they interact with it very much on a level of, again, I think Pat Nixon sees some part of herself in the main protagonist, the woman dancer from The Detachment of Red Women, seeing how poorly she's being treated. And because she feels mistreated by all of this that she's going through now for part of the cause for her husband. And so she really starts to identify with that girl and starts going to Nixon. Nick, help her, help her, help her. And they get up and they start becoming involved in the events of the ballet until the main dancer misses her cue. And instead of just going, oh, that poor girl, Madame Mao decides that she is going to get up and show what happens to a girl who misses her cue in her China and teach the Nixons a lesson about what this really is about, and revolution or death at all costs. And she bursts into this coloratura aria that is a mindfuck. And when I had some actual people who can sing soprano parts heard it, they went, "Oh my God, did she hit high this? Did she hit high this again?" I'm really no musicologist or expert on that, but they were quite flabbergasted by it, and every phrase that Madame Mao says in her aria is a double or even a triple meaning. She starts out with, "I am the mouth of Mao Zedong. I am the mouth of Mao Zedong. When I appear, the people hang. When I appear, they hang upon my words." So again, two separate meanings there that are the same thing. And my personal favorite, "Let me be a grain of sand in heaven's eye, and I shall taste eternal joy." Meaning either, let me be so insignificant that I'm like a grain of sand in the eyes of the divine, and I will taste eternal joy, or let me be an irritant in the eyes of the divine, and I shall do that. But then the characters of the ballet and start to turn on each other in a witch hunt, a kind of pro-communist witch hunt, if you will, where the scared girl is at first intimidated into feeding the dogma, and instead of, and this is something that really mindfucked me rewatching Nixon in China just now for this video. During the COVID lockdown, I got into rewatching Nixon in China because I couldn't go to a real opera, and because of that, I also got into the original ballet, The Detachment of Red Women. I'm not such a fan of ballet. I really think it's half the opera, but because actually The Detachment of Red Women is part opera, and also the choreography of it is really quite clear that you can tell what they're doing versus just a bunch of pas de deux and the guy lifting up the girl, and you can't even tell what plot this has, if any. You can really tell what the plot of The Detachment of Red Women is. So it was really my first time rewatching Nixon in China after seeing online The Detachment of Red Women. And knowing how they changed it from here on out in Nixon in China, because the guy that she is seen pointing a gun at and killing, when they start changing the plot of The Detachment of Red Women, is really the guy who heroically sacrifices himself for the cause so that the main female dancer can take over and continue to, what happens at the end of the opera, she takes over his gun and portfolio and continues to go on and fight the good cause, and then they all sing the Internationale in the actual ballet. But here in Nixon in China, she actually shoots him because he could be the next witch hunter guy, her teacher, who taught her everything once she joins the detachment. And how much actually, what's a very lighthearted scene in the ballet, which is the main woman learning how to throw grenades and fight, where the actress who just got called out on missing her cue is crying as she's being largely taught to use these guns against her will. I cannot go on about this anymore. I decided before doing this that I will have to leave comparing the ballet and Nixon in China. It's just going to be another subject for a whole video that I will do later on. But just the way it turns the actual ballet on its ear and how every line in Lady Mao's aria twists everything she's saying. I guess, again, how Pat Nixon twists campaign slogans almost to being disgusting. Just these double entendres here that you'd never see if this was all being sung in Italian. Act 3 is the most cerebral of all the acts. It takes place in kind of a cross section of the 5 main characters' bedrooms on the last night of their historic visit to China, or in the case of the Chinese, their historic hosting of the visit to China. And they reflect on not only these past few days, but on the legacy of their entire lives, really, and their legacy for the future and what is to come. Again, in which Zhou Enlai seems to fulfill the role of the most circumspect, cognizant of their place in the world, not just their own legacy, but in larger world history, if you will. And it was also, I have to say, when I first saw it in person in another lifetime at Long Beach Opera, with not the Peter Sellers staging, and then later on where I actually saw the Met live broadcast of what you're seeing now, which is where I fell in love with Nixon in China, actually, on the second time I saw it, not the first. So as we open, Mao is brought down from that iconic larger-than-life poster of Mao that we all have come to view as Mao, but it's not really Mao the person, now is it? And he comes down from his own mouth, down these stairs, the jetway, actually it is, for the jet stairs from the beginning of the opera, an old and decrepit man. And then we have kind of this medley that ensues between the Nixons and between the Maos. And they recall earlier days, the days of yore. Pat Nixon recalls really how happy she was with nostalgia, her days as a housewife. And really that was all she ever wanted to be. And how when she got into all this politics, it was because of how much she loved her husband. And she keeps a stiff upper lip while becoming almost contemptuous of Nixon at the time for what he's put her through. And Nixon goes on this whole thing about this, you can think what you will of Nixon as president or with what happened shortly thereafter, his visit to China with Watergate. But he admits to always of being just a scared guy out in the Pacific Theater in World War II. He recalls this whole thing where it was during a hurricane or a typhoon that he lived through, where he thought he was going to die. And he thought that, he even says, this was the day I died. I could have died. And he wonders if it was good that he lived any further. And he recalls running a hamburger stand that he set up at a way station in the Pacific. And he almost, again, with the shaking hand that you recall in front of the media and in front of everyone from Act 1, he recalls the shaking hands of not being worried about and not being able to handle how much relish he had on hand and whether this burger or not was done to a turn. And, just running the snack shack scared him, let alone running president, despite the image he portrayed to the world. A person that puffed out his chest and was strong as he had to be, but because at the same time was always living on the era of his own downfall inside, which gives an insight into this guy that was able to be such a strong man, an amazing person, president even in terms of foreign relations, of what he did for world foreign relations, not only with his visit to China, but with detente in the Soviet Union. And so all of that, which made him a great man, also made him insecure inside. And I think this opera really captures that. Then we go to the Maos. We have Mao realizing his old, and him recalling the day when Madame Mao, as a young, hot actress, walked into the Communist Party headquarters for the first time, and the good days that they had on the war trail, riding to Peking. It becomes very apparent to them that they're both two sides of the same coin, again, with Mao being kind of the carrot to her stick, and Mao realizing that he's going to be put to sleep They literally even bring in the staging out the Chinese flag over him like he's dead, with his mouthpiece being used to justify whatever the party says after that. And Lady Mao being on the outs, of course, after Mao's death, but her vowing to come back, that zealotist ideolatry or ideology that she comes to represent, saying, "I'm going to lay low for a while, but I'm just ready to come back whenever they want me." So that kind of, we will kill everyone who doesn't agree with us kind of thing. In politics, as you see in history, that's always waiting to come back. People's cults of personality are always used to justify them after they died. And Nixon in the end says it to Pat. It's one of the last things they sing in the act. He sings to her, who's just had her life upended by all this, his political career. He just looks at her before they go to bed and he says, "Thanks. Thanks for putting up with me. Thanks for putting up with all this that I tried to achieve. I know what it's done to you." So the Maos reflect on what it's all for. So do they. And then they go to bed. Arguably, Mao dies. And then this is the really interesting thing. In the Peter Sellers version in 1972, they could not have known that Zhou Enlai was dying of stomach cancer. So in 2011, they brought it back with all of these flowers around him like he's dying. And the master of ceremonies, Zhou, gives the final words of the opera, outright questioning for themselves and for the audience, and even for future generations. Again, if you think about U.S.-China relations now, EU-China relations, what's going on again with the access being between China and Russia now, he really gives you the final say on it all and what this has all been about in terms of larger-than-life icons just being people with foibles and fears and breaking hearts and rebellious zealotry, coming out to change world events, and now we have to live with them. So I'll leave you now to Zhou Enlai.